It was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. My 30th birthday, a milestone, surrounded by friends, family, and the man I had loved for the past 7 years. I had spent weeks planning every detail. The venue, the music, the food, everything had to be perfect. My husband, Daniel, had promised me he would make it unforgettable. And he did. But not in the way I had imagined. The night started off beautifully. I wore a deep red satin dress that hugged my curves perfectly, my hair styled in soft waves. Daniel had smiled at me when I walked down the stairs of our mansion, his eyes dark with admiration. "You look stunning," he whispered as he kissed my cheek. I believed him. I believed everything he said. But then she walked in, tall, beautiful, and dripping in arrogance, with her hand resting comfortably in the crook of Daniel's arm. My heart stilled as I watched him lean down and whisper something in her ear. Her laugh was sharp, cutting through the music and chatter like a blade. In that moment I knew. I knew exactly who she was. And I knew that everything was about to change. The party was in full swing when Daniel and his guest made their entrance. I stood near the bar, frozen, my champagne flute trembling in my hand. My best friend Olivia nudged me. "Who the hell is that?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing at the blonde clinging to my husband's side. I forced myself to breathe, to smile even though my hands were shaking. "I don't know." But I did. Her name was Emily. She was Daniel's assistant. The same woman who had been conveniently attached to his business trips. The one whose name appeared in his messages more often than it should have. I had confronted Daniel about her once, but he'd laughed it off, kissing my forehead and telling me not to be so insecure. "Insecurity is not attractive, darling," he'd said. I watched as Emily brushed her manicured fingers down the sleeve of Daniel's jacket, her red lips curling into a smirk when their eyes met. He leaned down and said something that made her laugh. My vision blurred with rage. Olivia touched my arm. "Do you want me to make a scene?" she asked, her voice low. "No," I whispered. "Not yet." I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I wasn't going to storm out, humiliated and broken. No, they wanted to make a fool of me. They wanted me to crumble. But I wasn't weak. Daniel finally approached me, Emily still at his side. His smile was thin, his eyes gleaming with a challenge. "Darling," he said smoothly, "there's someone I want you to meet." Emily extended her hand. Her red nails flashed under the chandelier lights. "Hi," she said, her tone syrupy. "I'm Emily, Daniel's assistant." I took her hand, squeezing it a little too hard. Her smile didn't falter, but I saw the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "Lovely to meet you," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Daniel chuckled, sliding an arm around Emily's waist, right in front of me. "Emily's been such a great help to me. I don't know what I'd do without her." The room seemed to tilt. My chest burned, my throat tightening as betrayal slammed into me. But I smiled. I forced myself to smile. I wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing me fall apart. Instead, I turned to Olivia. "Excuse me," I said sweetly. "I think it's time to make a toast." I walked toward the stage where the microphone stood, heels clicking against the marble floor. My legs were shaking, but I stood tall. I would not be humiliated. I would not let them see me weak. The room quieted as I stepped up to the mic. I raised my glass. "First, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight," I said, my voice steady. "And I'd like to thank my husband Daniel for surprising me." Daniel's smile tightened. Emily's hand rested possessively on his chest. I met Daniel's gaze and I smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. "You see," I continued, "marriage is about trust, isn't it? It's about knowing that the person you're with would never betray you, would never humiliate you." Daniel's eyes darkened. Emily's smile slipped. "But sometimes people surprise you." I let my eyes trail deliberately toward Emily. "Sometimes the person you trust the most walks into a room with a guest and expects you to smile and swallow the humiliation." Emily's eyes widened. Daniel's hand dropped from her waist. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, lifting my glass. "To loyalty, to love, and to the painful but necessary truth that sometimes we don't know the person sleeping next to us." I drained my glass. The silence in the room was deafening. Then I walked off the stage and straight toward Olivia. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice low. "Do me a favor? Anything. Make sure Daniel remembers this night." I slipped past the crowd and toward the door. My heart was pounding. I could feel Daniel's eyes burning into my back, but I didn't stop. I stepped out into the cool night air, my heels clicking against the pavement as I walked toward the black car waiting at the curb. As I slid into the back seat, I pulled out my phone. There was already a message waiting for me. Unknown number. Did you like the show? I smiled, my pulse quickening. Let the games begin. That night didn't break me, it awakened me. Daniel thought he could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. He thought I would crumble beneath the weight of his betrayal. But he underestimated me. He would regret that mistake. Because I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. No, Daniel was going to feel every ounce of pain he had inflicted on me. And Emily? She was going to wish she had never touched what belonged to me. This was just the beginning. And Daniel was about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman betrayed. The next morning I woke up to the soft morning light streaming through the curtains, the sound of birds faintly audible through the closed windows. My head throbbed slightly from the champagne I'd downed the night before, but it wasn't the alcohol that left my chest aching. It was the betrayal. Daniel had humiliated me. He had walked into my birthday party with his mistress on his arm, smug and arrogant, daring me to react. But I hadn't crumbled. No, I had smiled through the pain. I had delivered my toast like a queen, letting him know in front of everyone that I knew exactly what he was doing. And I had walked away with my head held high. But that wasn't enough. Daniel needed to feel the betrayal. He needed to experience the humiliation, the pain, the way I had. And I was going to make sure he did. I sat up in bed and checked my phone. Olivia had already sent me a string of messages. Olivia, are you okay? Olivia, Daniel left with her last night. Can you believe that? Olivia, do you need me to come over? I sighed, rubbing my temples. Of course he had left with her. Daniel was the type of man who believed he could have it all. The perfect wife and the thrilling mistress. Not anymore. I climbed out of bed and slipped into my silk robe, padding barefoot across the cold marble floor toward the kitchen. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Olivia. It was Daniel. Good morning. We need to talk. My lips curled into a smile. Oh, we were going to talk all right, but not yet. Not until I was ready. I ignored the message and poured myself a cup of coffee. As I stood at the window watching the city below, I thought about the years I had invested in Daniel. 7 years of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. All thrown away for some blonde with red nails and a dangerous smile. I should have seen it coming. He had grown distant over the last year. The late business trips, the unanswered messages, the way he would pull away when I touched him. I had blamed it on work stress, convinced myself that marriage naturally goes through rough patches. I had been a fool. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Hello. Hi, love. His voice was smooth, confident, as if nothing had happened. I let the silence stretch. Are you still upset about last night? He asked finally. My jaw tightened. Am I upset that my husband brought his mistress to my birthday party? I laughed coldly. What do you think, Daniel? He sighed. Listen, it's not what you think. Don't insult me by lying. I'm not lying. His tone sharpened. Emily is complicated. It's not what you think. Oh. My voice was razor sharp. So you're saying that it's completely normal for a married man to show up at his wife's birthday party with another woman's hand on his arm? You're overreacting. I felt my pulse spike. Overreacting. My voice dropped to a deadly calm. You embarrassed me. In front of everyone. Do you have any idea how that felt? Listen, he said, his tone softening. Let me come over. We can fix this. Fix this. I almost laughed. Daniel, we are way past fixing this. Just give me a chance to explain. I don't need an explanation. I cut him off coldly. I need you to remember this moment. Because this is the moment everything changes. I ended the call before he could respond. My hand was shaking as I set down the phone. But my mind was crystal clear. Daniel wanted to play games? Fine. But I was going to make sure that I won. Olivia showed up 2 hours later with coffee and a wild gleam in her eyes. So, she said, setting the cups down on the kitchen island. Tell me what we're doing. I'm going to make him suffer, I said simply. Olivia grinned. Now you're speaking my language. We sat down and I laid out the details. Daniel was successful, wealthy, powerful, and well-connected. His image was his currency. He had built his career on the perception of being the perfect husband, the perfect businessman, the perfect man. I was going to tear that image apart. Step 1. Olivia leaned forward eagerly. I need proof, I said. Concrete proof that Daniel and Emily have been sleeping together. I think I can help with that. Olivia's smile turned predatory. I know someone who specializes in these kinds of things. I raised an eyebrow. And by specializes, you mean? Olivia shrugged. Let's just say he's very good at uncovering secrets. Good. I smiled. Because once I have proof, I'm going to burn Daniel's perfect little life to the ground. That night, Daniel called again. I ignored him. He sent a message. Let's talk. I ignored that too. Instead, I got dressed. A sleek black dress, shorter than anything Daniel would have ever approved of, paired with crimson lipstick and towering heels. When I walked into the upscale bar downtown, heads turned. Men watched me with open interest. I smiled, letting the attention wash over me. I spotted Daniel near the back of the bar. He was alone, a whiskey glass in hand. His eyes darkened when he saw me. I walked over slowly, letting my hips sway just enough to make him notice. His eyes traveled over me, his jaw tightening. You're ignoring my calls, he said. I've been busy, I replied smoothly. He set down his drink. Sit down. I slid into the seat across from him, crossing my legs slowly. His gaze dropped just for a second. I don't understand why you're being so dramatic, Daniel said, his tone edged with frustration. I smiled faintly. Dramatic. I leaned forward. Darling, I haven't even started yet. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I just smiled, brushing my fingers along the stem of my martini glass. Just then Olivia walked into the bar. She caught my eye, then gave me a small nod. It had begun. The next morning I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. Did you see it? Olivia's voice crackled through the line. See what? Check your messages. I opened the file Olivia had sent. My heart pounded as I watched the video play out on the screen. Daniel, in a hotel lobby with Emily clinging to his arm. He leaned down, kissed her. The video cut off. Attached was a screenshot from the hotel's registry. Daniel's name, Emily's name, and the date. I told you, Olivia said smugly. Pie guy is good. My hands tightened around the phone. My blood burned with satisfaction. It's time, I said quietly. For what? Olivia asked. For Daniel to see what betrayal feels like. Daniel's business empire depended on his image. The clean-cut husband, the man with the perfect marriage. But once this proof surfaced, that image would shatter. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted him to lose everything. And when I was done, Daniel would regret the day he ever thought he could betray me. This was war. And I wasn't going to lose. The video was explosive. Daniel, suited up in the lobby of the Rosewood Hotel, leaning down to kiss Emily on the mouth. Her hand resting possessively on his chest. His name and hers, signed into the hotel registry, with a timestamp that confirmed exactly what I had suspected. But suspicion wasn't enough. I had proof now. Cold, undeniable evidence that Daniel had not only betrayed me but had paraded his infidelity in public without a second thought. And now, it was time for Daniel to understand exactly what betrayal feels like. I sat in my kitchen, the early morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Olivia sat across from me, scrolling through her phone with a satisfied smile. My guy already made sure this video gets into the right hands, she said, setting the phone down with a clink of her manicured nails against the marble countertop. It should hit the gossip blogs by noon. I sipped my coffee. Good. Olivia tilted her head. How far do you want to take this? I smiled coldly. All the way. The plan was already in motion. Olivia's contact had arranged for the video and registry receipt to be sent to a handful of key influencers and media outlets. Daniel's carefully crafted public image, the charming businessman, the devoted husband, was about to burn. But that was only phase 1. I wanted Daniel to feel the weight of this betrayal in every corner of his life. His career, his reputation, his relationship with his clients and partners. And when the dust settled, I wanted him to come crawling to me. Not because I wanted him back. No, because I wanted to see him broken. And then I would walk away. By noon, the video had hit the press. The headlines were brutal. Business mogul Daniel Carrington caught in cheating scandal. Mistress identified as executive assistant. Daniel Carrington's picture-perfect marriage shattered by affair. Betrayed wife exposes husband's infidelity at her own birthday party. The video went viral almost instantly. The comments section beneath the articles were vicious. Wow. To do that to his wife in public? Heartless. Emily's got no shame. But Daniel's the real villain here. I hope she takes half of everything. Olivia texted me later that afternoon. Olivia. Daniel's PR team is scrambling. He's trending everywhere. He's fucked. I smiled. Daniel called me twice. I ignored both calls. An hour later he sent a message. We need to talk. I deleted it without responding. Daniel's business was built on his reputation. Luxury hotels and resorts catering to an elite clientele. His clients wanted discretion, reliability, and professionalism. The last thing they wanted was a scandal. By the evening, I started hearing rumors that several key investors were considering pulling out of Daniel's latest project, a high-profile resort in the Maldives. His partners were nervous about the negative publicity. Just a little more pressure, Olivia said over dinner. I swirled my wine glass. It's coming. The next morning, Daniel's company issued a bland press release attempting to clarify the situation. Mr. Carrington maintains that his relationship with Mrs. Carrington is a private matter. He asks for privacy during this difficult time. Pathetic. And then came the second blow. Olivia had called in a favor from one of her friends, a senior editor at Forbes. An article dropped the following morning titled, "Behind the Glamour: How Daniel Carrington's Personal Scandal Could Sink His Business Empire." It detailed the shaky financial standing of Daniel's latest project and speculated that his personal issues could lead to a mass exodus of investors. By lunchtime, Daniel's stock had dipped 8%. The phone calls started coming in. Angry shareholders. Nervous board members. Daniel was losing control. And I was just getting started. Daniel showed up at my apartment that evening. I heard the knock and took my time answering the door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there looking tired and disheveled. His tie was loosened and his shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept. "Can we talk?" he asked. I leaned casually against the doorframe. "About what?" His jaw tensed. "You know what?" I smiled faintly. "I don't think I have anything to say to you." Daniel's eyes darkened. "Do you have any idea how bad this is?" I tilted my head. "Oh, I think I have a very clear idea." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Investors are panicking. My board is talking about replacing me." "Good." Daniel's eyes flashed. "You did this." "Did I?" I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow. "Or did you do this when you paraded your mistress into my birthday party?" His hands curled into fists. "I told you it's not what you think." "Really?" My voice was razor sharp. "Because the hotel registry and that video seem pretty clear." Daniel's mouth tightened. "Emily doesn't matter." "Oh." I smiled coldly. "Then why was her lipstick all over your mouth in the video?" Daniel's face twisted. "This is dangerous, Amelia. You're going too far." I leaned toward him, my voice soft and venomous. "No, Daniel. I'm just getting started." I closed the door in his face. 2 days later, Emily was on the cover of the Daily Post. I wasn't his mistress. Executive Assistant Emily Cross denies allegations. In the article, Emily claimed that Daniel had misled her, that she thought Daniel and I were separated. "She's trying to protect herself," Olivia said over the phone. "She's distancing herself from the fallout." "Smart girl," I said. "Not smart enough." That night, Olivia sent me another video. Emily, stumbling out of a club, visibly intoxicated, clinging to some unknown man. Paparazzi were all over her. And just like that, Emily became the scandal's second casualty. Daniel's affair was now a full-blown PR crisis. The board issued a statement saying they were re-evaluating Daniel's position. I smiled as I read the headline. Daniel called again that night. This time I answered. "Amelia." His voice was low and desperate. "Please. Let's meet. Let's fix this." "Fix it?" I laughed softly. "There's no fixing this." "I'll leave her," Daniel said. "I'll cut her off. Just tell the press that it was a misunderstanding." Please. I let the silence stretch until I heard him breathing hard on the other end. No, Daniel. He exhaled shakily. Amelia, I'm begging you. I smiled darkly. Good. Now you know what it feels like. I hung up. Daniel resigned from his company 2 days later. The board framed it as a mutual decision, but everyone knew the truth. His name was toxic. His business empire was crumbling. Emily went silent after her PR team confirmed she had cut ties with Daniel. Last I heard, she was looking for work. And Daniel? He disappeared from the social circuit. Some rumors said he left the country. Others claimed he was in rehab. I didn't care. Because I had won. I had taken back my power. Daniel had tried to humiliate me. He had tried to break me. But in the end it was him who was left ruined. And I was free. It's amazing how quickly a life can unravel. Daniel had built his entire identity around the illusion of perfection. The successful businessman, the devoted husband, the charming socialite. But it had only taken one carefully placed crack for the entire facade to collapse. After the video, after Emily's public meltdown, after the investors pulled their money and the board forced him out, Daniel Carrington was finished. And I wasn't done yet. Because while Daniel's professional life was in shambles, his personal life was still standing. He still had his wealth, his name, his network of contacts. That was going to change. He had taken everything from me. My trust, my security, my dignity. It was time to return the favor. It had been 2 weeks since Daniel's resignation. The scandal was still fresh, lingering in the media, but the headlines were starting to shift to other stories. I sat in a sunlit corner of a quiet rooftop lounge, my legs crossed beneath a short silk dress, sipping from a glass of white wine. Olivia slid into the seat across from me, her expression sharp and satisfied. "Did you hear?" she said, setting her sunglasses down on the table. I smiled faintly. "About the sale?" He grinned. "Daniel put the penthouse on the market. He's liquidating assets." I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Rumor has it the investors' pullout was bigger than expected. He's running out of cash." I took a slow sip of my wine. "Good." Olivia's eyes gleamed. "So what's next?" "Next." My gaze slid toward the street below, where the city buzzed with life beneath us. "How I take what's left." Daniel and I had never signed a prenup. He had wanted to, his lawyers had insisted, but I had played the long game. I had convinced Daniel that a prenup was a betrayal of trust, that marriage was about faith, not contracts. And Daniel, ever the romantic, had agreed. Big mistake. My lawyer, Andrew, sat across from me in his office, his silver-rimmed glasses resting on the tip of his nose. He flipped through a file, tapping a manicured finger against the top page. "You understand what you're asking for?" Andrew said, lifting his gaze toward me. "Every penny." Andrew's brow arched. "Half of Daniel's estate is valued at over $70 million. And? You want to go for the business assets too?" "I want everything he cares about." Andrew's mouth curved into a sharp smile. "I hope you're ready for a fight." "I'm counting on it." 2 days after I filed for divorce, Daniel showed up at my apartment. I didn't let him inside. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed over my silk robe as he stared at me with bloodshot eyes. His suit was wrinkled, his hair slightly disheveled, a far cry from the immaculate businessman he used to be. "Are you serious?" Daniel's voice was rough. "I'm always serious." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "Half, Amelia? You want half of everything?" I smiled faintly. "No, Daniel. I want more than half." His eyes darkened. "You're out of your mind." "Am I?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Or are you just upset because you know you'll lose?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I was willing to work this out with you. To fix this." "You think you can fix this?" I shook my head slowly. "You walked into my birthday party with another woman, Daniel. You humiliated me. You made a fool out of me." Daniel's eyes flashed. "You're not going to win this." I smiled coldly. "You keep thinking that." 2 days later, Emily called me. It was unexpected. The last thing I'd heard was that Emily had gone into hiding after the press painted her as a home-wrecking gold digger. I answered on the third ring. "Amelia." "Emily." There was silence for a long moment, then a deep, shaky breath. I need to talk to you." "About?" Daniel. Her voice was tight. You were right. I smiled faintly. About what? He told me that he loved me. That we had a future. But after the scandal broke, he cut me off. Her voice cracked. Won't even return my calls. And you expected what exactly? Emily was silent. Let me guess, I said coldly. Daniel made you feel special. Made you feel like you were different. And now that things aren't convenient for him anymore, he's dropped you. Emily sniffled. I'm pregnant. My breath caught. What? Emily's voice trembled. I'm pregnant. I told Daniel and he told me to get rid of it. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. And what exactly do you expect me to do about that? I thought you'd want to know. Why? My voice sharpened. Because you're the only one who knows what it's like to be used by him. I exhaled slowly. Emily. She sounded desperate. Please, Amelia. I don't know what to do. I hesitated, then finally said, You're on your own. I hung up. The pregnancy changed things. Daniel's spotless image had already been dragged through the mud. But an affair that resulted in an abandoned pregnancy? That would push it over the edge. That night I met Olivia at a quiet wine bar. So, she said, swirling her glass, what are you going to do? Nothing, I said smoothly. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Nothing. I don't need to do anything, I said. Daniel will destroy himself. How? Emily is emotional. Hurt. Angry. I smiled faintly. It's only a matter of time before she leaks the pregnancy to the press. And when she does, Daniel will lose the last thing he's clinging to. 2 weeks later, the headline broke. Daniel Carrington's mistress claims she's pregnant. Business mogul allegedly cut ties after affair scandal. It was over. Daniel's last few loyal investors pulled out. His name was officially blacklisted in every major business circle. He was ruined. 2 days later, I signed the divorce settlement papers. Andrew handed them to me with a satisfied smile. You got everything you wanted, Andrew said. No, I corrected, signing the last page. I got what I deserved. Daniel showed up at the divorce proceedings. He looked broken, thinner, his eyes hollow. He stood at the doorway after the settlement was finalized, watching me with an unreadable expression. Congratulations, Daniel said quietly. I smiled faintly. For what? You won. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. No, Daniel. I survived. He smiled bitterly. Was it worth it? I tilted my head. What do you think? Daniel's eyes darkened. He reached for me, but I stepped back. You destroyed this marriage, I said softly. And now you'll spend the rest of your life regretting it. I walked away. My heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound of my freedom echoing through the courthouse. Outside, Olivia was waiting. It's done, she asked. It's done. She smiled. How does it feel? I smiled faintly, lifting my face toward the sun. Like I finally won. I thought it would feel different. Victory. After everything I'd done to destroy Daniel, the calculated exposure of his affair, the destruction of his reputation, the stripping of his wealth and status, I expected to feel weightless. Powerful. Vindicated. Instead, all I felt was empty. The settlement had been finalized 2 weeks ago. Half of Daniel's assets now belonged to me, including the penthouse apartment, the vacation home in Tuscany, and his remaining business shares. Daniel had been forced to sell off most of his other holdings to cover the financial blow after the scandal tanked his business. And Emily's pregnancy? The press had devoured the story. Daniel had tried to spin it, claiming that the relationship had been complicated. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Daniel Carrington was radioactive now. No one wanted to work with him. No one wanted to be associated with him. I had won. And yet, why did it feel like I had lost something too? I stood in the massive living room of the penthouse, the same penthouse Daniel and I had shared for years, and stared out over the city skyline. The walls were bare now. The artwork Daniel had chosen, the carefully curated sculptures and modern paintings, were gone. He had taken them when he left. The furniture remained, but it all felt hollow without the presence that had once filled the space. I took a slow sip of my red wine and turned as Olivia walked in, holding a folder in one hand and a sharp smile on her face. How are you holding up? She asked. I smiled faintly. I'm fine. She raised an eyebrow. You don't look fine. I sighed, setting the glass down on the marble countertop. It's strange, isn't it? You spend years building something with someone, memories, a life, and then, in the span of a few months, it's just gone. Olivia scoffed. Please. He destroyed that life long before you finished it off. I know. Olivia crossed her arms, studying me carefully. Then why do you look like you miss him? I stiffened. I don't. Aha. Olivia dropped the folder on the counter. Well, maybe this will cheer you up. I opened the folder and skimmed the contents. Financial statements. Property transfers. Legal documents confirming the divorce settlement. It's all done, Olivia said. The Tuscany house, the penthouse, it's officially yours. And Daniel? He's officially broke. Good. And, Olivia smiled wickedly. The investors are circling. You could flip the Tuscany property and make a clean profit. Or hold on to it. I'll think about it. Olivia's gaze sharpened. You're not thinking about going soft, are you? I met her gaze coldly. After everything he did to me? Just checking. She turned to leave but paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. What? Daniel's been seen at the plaza. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Drinking alone. Good. You sure about that? I hesitated. Why wouldn't I be? Olivia studied me carefully, then nodded. Just don't let him crawl back. I smiled faintly. Trust me. That's not going to happen. I saw him a week later. Purely by accident. Or maybe not. I was attending a gallery opening with Olivia and a few acquaintances, dressed in a sleek black dress, diamond earrings glinting beneath the soft lights of the venue. I was sipping champagne, nodding politely at some pretentious artist's explanation of his work when I felt it. A shift in the air. And then I saw him. Daniel stood near the far wall, half hidden beneath the shadows of the gallery's dim lighting. His dark hair was slightly longer, curling at the edges. His suit was tailored but slightly rumpled. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were dull and shadowed. Our eyes met across the room. My pulse quickened. I forced myself to smile faintly and turned back toward Olivia. But Daniel was already moving toward me. Amelia. His voice was low and rough as he stopped a few feet away. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze without expression. Daniel. You look. His eyes swept over me. Incredible. I smiled faintly. I know. His jaw tightened. Can we talk? About what? His eyes darkened. You know what? I took a slow sip of champagne. I don't think we have anything left to say to each other. Daniel stepped closer. Please. For a moment I considered turning away. But curiosity, or maybe lingering attachment, made me stay. Fine, I said, setting down my glass. 5 minutes. We slipped into a quiet side corridor. The noise of the gallery faded behind us. Daniel stood before me, hands in his pockets, his gaze intense. I deserved it, he said finally. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Everything you did to me. His mouth twisted. The press, the business fallout, the settlement. I deserved all of it. Good. His eyes darkened. But you don't look happy. Excuse me. You won, Amelia. His gaze sharpened. You got what you wanted. You destroyed me. So why don't you look satisfied? I smiled faintly. Maybe because I expected it to feel better. Daniel's gaze softened. It didn't, did it? My smile faded. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. I screwed up, Amelia. I ruined us. I hate myself for it. You should. I know. His eyes gleamed under the low lighting. But I still love you. My breath caught. Daniel's hand brushed against my wrist. I've had time to think about everything. And the truth is, I never stopped loving you. You have a funny way of showing it, I said coldly. I was a fool. His hand tightened gently on my wrist. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know. I pulled my hand away. And what am I supposed to do with that, Daniel? Pretend it never happened. No, he said softly. But maybe we could try again. I stared at him. After everything? I made a mistake, he said. His voice dropped, rough and pleading. but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. For a moment I felt a flicker of temptation. Daniel's hand was warm against my wrist. His gaze was steady, the vulnerability in his voice cutting through my walls. But then I remembered. The party. The humiliation. The way he had stood next to Emily and smiled at me as if he still controlled me. I smiled faintly. No, Daniel. His expression tightened. Amelia. You don't get to come back now that you've lost everything. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I destroyed you because you deserved it. You humiliated me. You treated me like a trophy, something to be replaced when I no longer served your ego. Daniel's throat worked. I know. And now you want forgiveness? My smile sharpened. Too late. Daniel's eyes darkened. You're colder than I remember. I learned from the best. I stepped back. Goodbye, Daniel. He watched me as I walked away. And this time I didn't look back. That night I sat on the balcony of the penthouse, a glass of wine in hand. The city stretched out before me, glittering and alive. The chapter with Daniel was finally closed. I had taken back my power. I had rebuilt myself. And I had walked away not because I was bitter, but because I knew I deserved more. And now I was free. Completely and utterly free. It's strange, the feeling that comes after you've won. You imagine it'll be triumphant, standing on the ashes of your enemy's ruin, arms raised in victory. But the truth is, once the fire burns out, all that's left is smoke and silence. Daniel was gone now, stripped of his wealth, his status, and his dignity. The business empire he had spent years building was in pieces. The investors had pulled out. The board had cut him loose. His name, once a symbol of success, was now synonymous with scandal and failure. And Emily? She had disappeared too. After the pregnancy news broke, Daniel had tried to cut her a deal to keep her quiet. But Emily wasn't stupid, she took the money and ran. Last I heard, she was living in Miami with a new boyfriend, a personal trainer half her age. Good for her. But none of that mattered anymore. Because I had closed that chapter. Or so I thought. I was in Tuscany when Daniel's ghost reappeared in my life. The Tuscan villa had been part of the divorce settlement, one of Daniel's most prized assets. I had considered selling it, but Olivia convinced me to hold on to it. You deserve to enjoy the spoils of war, she had said. So I kept it. And 2 months after the divorce, I flew to Italy to breathe in the warm air and figure out what life looked like now that Daniel was out of the picture. The villa was stunning. A long, winding driveway led to the sprawling house with ivy crawling up the stone walls. Olive trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the scent of lavender drifted through the air. It was peaceful. Calm. Until Daniel showed up. I was sitting by the pool, a glass of chilled white wine in hand, when I heard the sound of gravel crunching beneath tires. I turned, sunglasses perched on my nose, as a sleek black car pulled up the driveway. And then the door opened and Daniel stepped out. He wore a linen shirt and slacks, his sleeves rolled up, dark hair tousled from the wind. He looked relaxed, as if he hadn't just destroyed his entire life. I stood slowly as he walked toward me. How the hell did you find me? Daniel's mouth curved faintly. You forget I bought this place. I crossed my arms. Correction, you gave it to me. His smile tightened. May I sit? I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I gestured toward the chair beside me. Daniel sat, leaning back with that familiar ease, as if this was still his house. You have some nerve, I said coldly. Daniel's gaze slid toward me. I figured I'd give you a little time to cool off. My jaw clenched. You don't get to walk back into my life just because you're bored. He studied me carefully. Is that what you think this is? You lost, I said. The divorce is final. You're broke. Your business is gone. What do you want? Daniel's gaze sharpened. Closure. I laughed coldly. You think you deserve closure? Maybe not. His jaw tightened. But I need it. I scoffed. Unbelievable. You got everything you wanted, Daniel said, his voice low. You destroyed my career. Took my fortune. Left me with nothing. You earned it. I know. His eyes darkened. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. But you should know. He leaned toward me, his voice dropping. I don't regret it. My breath caught. What? I don't regret any of it, Daniel said. Not the business. Not the money. Not Emily. His gaze burned into me. The only thing I regret is losing you. I forced myself to laugh. That's convenient. You don't believe me. Why should I? I stood crossing my arms. You think you can say a few sweet words and suddenly we're even? Daniel stood too, his eyes steady. No. I don't expect you to believe me. But I want you to know the truth. I shook my head. I don't care. Yes you do, Daniel said softly. Or you wouldn't have let me sit down. I hated that he was right. Daniel. I loved you, he said, his voice sharp. And I screwed it up. But I never stopped loving you. My chest tightened painfully. Don't do this. I'm not asking for you back, Daniel said. I just needed you to know. I turned away, swallowing hard. You should leave. Daniel's gaze lingered on me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Take care of yourself, Amelia. And then he walked away. I spent the next few days trying to shake off the conversation. Daniel was good at that, slipping under my skin, making me question everything. Even after everything he'd done, there was still a part of me that wanted to believe him. That he had loved me. That he had regretted it. That it hadn't all been a lie. But I couldn't afford to think like that. Because if Daniel had taught me anything, it was that love was dangerous. Love could ruin you. So I packed away the memory of that conversation and focused on the future. 3 weeks later, I got a message from Olivia. Olivia. Daniel is back in business. My stomach tightened. Me? What do you mean? Olivia. New company. Smaller than the last. But he's building something. Me and Emily? Olivia. Gone. I exhaled slowly. I had crushed Daniel's business. Taken his fortune. Humiliated him in front of the world. And still he was getting back up. Maybe that was why I had married him in the first place. Daniel was dangerous and stubborn. A survivor. He was already rebuilding himself and part of me admired it. But I wasn't about to let him rise at my expense. I pulled out my phone and dialed Olivia. I want to know everything, I said. Every client. Every deal. Every weakness. Planning to sabotage him? Olivia's voice was amused. Not yet, I said. But I want to be prepared. You're still playing the game, Olivia said. I smiled faintly. Daniel taught me well. A week later, I spotted Daniel across a crowded charity gala. He stood near the back, dressed in a tailored black suit. His gaze slid toward me, dark and unreadable. I smiled faintly and raised my glass. Daniel's mouth curved into a small smile. He nodded. No hatred. No bitterness. Just recognition. We were two players in the same game, circling each other, anticipating the next move. But this time I was the one in control. And Daniel knew it. I turned away and walked into the crowd. My future was mine now. I didn't need Daniel, not anymore. But I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. Daniel would rebuild. He would come back. And when he did, I would be ready. Because the next time Daniel Carrington tried to play me, I'd make sure it was his final game. Think.